Hi, I'm Chris, and I'm excited to show you the Oscillate toolset from my new Anim Toys tool pack for Blackmagic Fusion. The Oscillate tools are the simplest tools in the pack. With them, you can create and modify simple animations like these really easily. As a beginner in Fusion, I found that a lot of YouTube tutorials demonstrating motion graphics require you to build keyframes and splines of oscillating patterns, which can be pretty fiddly, especially if you want objects to kind of bounce in and slowly come to a stop. So I figured why not create a tool to make that easier, and that's the origin of Anim Toys and the Oscillate tools in particular. The three basic Oscillate tools demonstrated here give you the ability to oscillate the position, angle, and size of images in your comp. Let's start with the Oscillate position tool. As you can see, this tool will move something in a repeated pattern, by default back and forth horizontally. The overall form of the animation is controlled by the basic controls. These are amplitude, which determines how far the object moves, frequency, which determines how often it repeats its motion, and wave type, which determines the wave function used to create the animation. If we play with the amplitude, say let's set it to 4, we see that the smiley is covering pretty much the whole width of the frame. The movement is created using a wave pattern. By default, it's a sine wave, and the amplitude describes the maximum distance from the center point of the wave. So in this case, the smiley is moving 4 to either side of the center position, but 4 of what? The Oscillate position tool uses the size of the image being input into it as the basis for the amplitude. So if I set amplitude to 1, the smiley will move exactly 1 smiley width to either side of center. Let's take a look at frequency. This number tells Fusion how many times the wave should happen every second, and it takes the timeline's frame rate into account to do this. So you need to be careful with standalone compositions that are outside of a timeline, because those seem to always be at the default project frame rate, regardless of what you tell Fusion when you create it. So this comp is in a 30 frame per second timeline, so one cycle will take 30 frames. If I go ahead and change frequency to 2, you'll see that one wave cycle now takes 15 frames. The wave type control allows you to pick what kind of wave will drive the oscillation. Sine waves give nice, smooth motion. Triangle waves give abrupt changes of direction compared to the sine waves. Bounce produces parabolic motion. The sawtooth gives repeated linear motion in the same direction, and square wave alternates between high and low points. The next set of controls determines the dampening of the amplitude over time. This allows you to create effects where an object kind of settles into place in an elastic way. This effect is mainly created with the amp-damp frames control. When this is set to 0, there is no damping, and the amplitude will stay the same over the entire comp. When you set it to a positive number, the damping effect will take place over the given number of frames. So, if I set it to 100 frames, and let me change the amplitude to a bigger number so you can see the effect better. There you go. The animation starts with an amplitude of 3 and reduces down to 0 at frame 100. You can also set this input to a negative number, which allows you to start the amplitude at 0 and amplify it over the given number of frames. So let's say we make this negative 150, so the whole comp. You can see that the oscillation starts really small and gets bigger and bigger until it maxes out at the end of the comp. The damping type uses mathematical equations that are tough to describe, so here's a visual guide to your choices.
Shake it, spin it, animate. Let's make stories, don't be late. Anim Toys, we're on our way, bringing fun to life today.
Next up are the spatial controls, which are pretty self-explanatory. The oscillation center moves the entire animation around in the frame. Like the amplitude control, the oscillation center uses values relative to the image being oscillated. So if I set the Y value to negative 0.5, it will move the smiley down one smiley height from the center of the comp. The oscillation angle control will change the axis along which the oscillation animation happens. Let's move down to the timing controls. The start frame can be used to delay the oscillation until the given frame. If you're using the damping controls, the damping will also be delayed to match. So if I set the start frame to 30, the entire animation will be delayed by 1 second. The phase shift control will allow you to pick which part of the wave you want the animation to start on. Let's look at a bounce wave. Let's set the oscillation angle to 90 so it looks like an actual bounce. If we go to frame 0, the smiley is at the center point, which for the bounce wave is the baseline of the bounce. When we start the animation, it looks like the smiley takes off from the ground and then starts bouncing. We can use the phase shift here and set it to 270, and that will set the start of the animation to the high point of the bounce, and it will look like the smiley drops onto the ground and then starts bouncing. Let's move on to the Oscillate size tool. As you can see, all the controls here are the same, and they behave in exactly the same way. I really like the bounce wave type here because it makes it look like you're looking down on a bouncing ball. The only different control here is the size offset. This one tells Fusion what the middle size should be, and the default value of 1 will leave the middle size as the actual size of the image, in our case, the smiley. It's a bit easier to see with the sine wave. With the default amplitude of 1 and the size offset of 1, the sine wave will oscillate between a size of 0 and a size of 2 times the original image size. And you can use a square wave here to make an easy blinking effect. Let's look at the third Oscillate tool, the Oscillate Angle tool. The Angle tool again has all the same controls as the others, except for the spatial controls. The angle offset controls the center angle around which the animation will rotate. If I lower the amplitude down a bit, you can see it better as I change the angle offset, and the oscillation changes its center angle. Let's reset that. The pivot control is just a normal transform pivot. You can use it to place the pivot point of the rotation like this. Let's change the wave to a bounce, change the angle offset, and phase shift it 180 degrees. Then we can add some damping, and there you go, a floppy, smiley balloon. Now, most of the time, oscillating position, angle, and size will be all that you need. But what if you could oscillate anything? Let's take a look. Now I'm going to double click in the flow area to deselect everything, and then I'll add the Oscillate Anything tool. This tool does not take an input, so it shouldn't be connected to anything. I'm going to view it in the viewport to start. This display is meant to be a visualization tool so you can see the oscillation wave as you build it. There's actually a better way to work with a tool in real time, but this can still be a good reference. The controls on the Oscillate Anything tool are again essentially the same as for the other Oscillate tools, but because the tool doesn't know what you're going to be applying the oscillation to, it's important to understand what the amplitude and oscillation center controls are going to do for you. The oscillation center control will set the middle point of the oscillation, and the amplitude will set the maximum distance from that center point. Now that's the same as for the other oscillation tools, but in this case you may want to have a specific range of values to be generated for the oscillation. So to do this, find the center of the range that you want and enter that in the oscillation center control. And then you take half of the size of the range and enter that for the amplitude. As a simple example of this, if you need the oscillation to move between 0 and 1, you would find the center of that range, which is 0.5, and enter that as the oscillation center. Then figure out the size of the range, which in this case would be 1 minus 0, so just 1. Take half of that, or 0.5, and use that for the amplitude. One caveat with this is that the bounce waves behave differently. And the oscillation center is actually the baseline for the bounce, unlike a sine wave, which will go equal distances on either side of the center. So if you've chosen a bounce wave, you should set the amplitude to the entire desired range of the oscillation, in this case 1 instead of 0.5. The Oscillate Anything tool creates an expression that you can use on any animatable numeric input in any tool in your comp. I think the easiest way to explain how this works is to demonstrate it with our smiley. I'm going to go ahead and reuse the Oscillate size tool we made before to create a bouncing animation. Now, let's say we want to create a blur effect that makes it appear like a camera is focused at a near point, so that the smiley is in focus when it's large and it goes out of focus the further it gets from the camera. To make this work, first I need to merge the smiley over an empty background to give the blur a chance to grow. Then I'll add a lens blur tool in. I'll leave all the values at default. At the bottom of the control panel for the Oscillate Anything node are two buttons, either of which can be used to copy an expression you've built in this tool. The difference is just that the static expression button creates an expression that won't change after you've pasted it into the control you're animating. So if I do that here, and then I go over to the lens blur node, I can create an expression for the blur size control and paste the copied expression into the box. You can take a look at the expression and you'll see it's just the mathematical equation that we've built using the Oscillate Anything tool. So at this point, if we want, we can just delete the Oscillate Anything tool and we'll still have the expression working for us in the blur node. Or if we need to create multiple different oscillations, we can reuse the same tool and just keep copying the static expressions we create. Any changes that you make in the Oscillate Anything tool will not be reflected in any expressions you've already copied and pasted. The other option is to use the Copy Expression Link button. This will create an expression that we can copy in the same way as before, so let's do that. When I paste in the expression now, it's just a link back to an internal value inside the Oscillate Anything tool. This makes the expression dynamic, so any changes you make to the Oscillate Anything tool will be reflected in the blur tool here. This makes it simple to see what you're doing as you build the oscillation. It does require that you keep the Oscillate Anything tool in the flow so that the blur tool can reference it. So that's it. Now we can adjust the options in the Oscillate Anything tool so that the blur changes together with the size of the smiley. To do that, we just need to make sure that the frequency matches the frequency in the Oscillate Size tool we created earlier, as well as the damping values if damping is enabled. For this, I'd like to have the smiley be fully in focus when it's at its largest point. That's a bouncing action, so I'm going to set the wave type to bounce. I'm going to bump up the amplitude to 2 to increase the maximum blur a little bit. Okay, now I'm just going to scrub through the comp to find the frame where the smiley is the biggest. Now this is a 30 frames per second comp, and we set the frequency to 1. So technically the frame where it's the biggest would be frame 7.5, so I'll just choose frame 7. What I can do now is use the phase shift control to roll through the wave until I find the shift that gives me the fully sharp focus on this frame. Since both frequencies are at 1 and I'm basically 90 degrees on the size oscillation, I'm guessing that the phase shift will be a multiple of 90. And it looks like 270 is the right number, so yep, that makes sense. If we play through the comp now, we can see that we've used the Oscillate Anything node to oscillate the blur size control. And by matching up the frequency with the Oscillate Size node, we've created an animation where it looks like our smiley goes out of focus as it moves away from us. Thanks for taking the time to learn about the Oscillate tools in the Anim Toys tool pack for Blackmagic Fusion. Use the link in the description to get the Anim Toys pack and check out these other videos to learn more about the tools.